Hi, welcome to SAPUI5 tutorial for the beginners. So today in this tutorial we are going to learn what is the fragments in SAPUI5. So let's create a project first. So here project, and then create SAPUI5 project, then create a project with the name fragments, then click next, and here name of the view is test and which is of type XML, and finish. Yes, project got created. So let me create a table first. So in this tutorial we are going to learn how to create a table in SAP UI5. Okay, so let's give the name of the title is fragments. Okay, so in case if you want to create a table in SAP UI5, there is something called as a table control. Okay, so we have to use something called as table control, and if you go to the documentation here, okay, so search for table, so you can find a table, SAPM table. So we're going to use this particular table, so which is a subclass of list base. If you go to the list base, so it is a subclass of control. Okay, so to create this table, so let me open this XML, and here sorry, create table by table, and then close this table. So if you can see here, so table is, it is a collection of objects, I can say it. We're going to display so many records inside a table. So here, in case if you want to, so as we discussed in the previous tutorial, so this is how we are going to bind the students array to this particular table. So here there is something called as mode, so single select master, and then so whenever you select any row inside a table, then we are going to execute this particular callback handler. Okay, so let's save this, and then so we are going to create the header toolbar. Okay, so in case if you want to create the header toolbar, you can create a header toolbar, otherwise you can leave it. So then I'm going to create the columns of the table. Okay, so I'm going to display student details in this particular table, so let's create the columns. Okay, so there is something called as columns by columns aggregation inside the table, and inside this we are going to put all the columns in here. Okay, so let's save this particular project and then run the project. Okay, so it will take a couple of minutes, so let's wait. Yes, project is up and running. So if you can see here, we are not able to see anything in here. So let me go back to the browser. Okay, so copy this URL and then go to the browser and then paste it here. So let's press F12. You can see the error in here. So you can see error codes a missing template for the factory. So that means what? So here it is saying that so you have created the columns, but you are not giving the template for these columns. So that means, so let me resolve this error with by some other coding. So what we can do is in case if you want to bind something in here, so the way how this columns aggregation is there, in the same way there is some other aggregation called items by items. Okay, so inside these items we are going to provide all the details. Okay, so what I will do is I'm just gonna provide the column list item. Okay, so in here, so column list item by list item is one more control, and then I'm using cells by cells aggregation of this particular column list item, and then in here, so this is object identifier is again one more control in SAP UI5. Okay, so what I'm doing in here is, so this is the value which belongs to the name, and this is the value which is belongs to this particular gender column, and this is the date of birth which belongs to this particular column date of birth, and father's name belongs to father's name, and contact number belongs to contact name. Okay, so let's save this and go back to the browser. Okay, and then refresh the browser in here so that you can see the table got generated. So that means what, in here we created a table. Okay, so we created a table, and items is an aggregation, so we are giving items, we are binding it to the students. So let's see later what is this students. Okay, so in here single select master is the mode of this particular table is single select master. So like this there are different modes available for the table, so we are going to look into that one later. Okay, so whenever you click on any row, so this is the event handler we are executing. Okay, yes, so now, so here we provided all the columns inside this columns aggregation. Okay, and then we are giving these items. That means, so in here this is a template we have provided, right? So now what we need to do is we need to bind some array, so which is, the name of the array is students. Okay, we are going to bind the students array to this table so that it will render all the students in that array. Okay, so for that what we can do is, let's go back to the test controller and then uncomment these two methods, on init and on after rendering. Okay, so now we need to create something called as a model first. Okay, so let's create the model. Okay, so to create the model, obviously, so we have to use something called as JSON model. Okay, go here, then use JSON model. Okay, so we are here, this JSON model is the one which expects the data. So here we haven't defined the data here, so let's define the data. Okay, so data is an object, so let's define the object, so with data, and inside this there is a property called students, which is an empty array. Okay, so now save this and go back to the browser and then refresh the browser. So there is no error, so that means we are fine. So let's go back to the Eclipse again. So in here, let's create the number of students. So what I can do is, I will create a student object. Okay, I will create a student object, and then I'm gonna push this particular student object into this data. Okay, so dot push. Okay, data dot students dot push. Okay, so let's push this particular student object in here. Okay, save this, and in here what I do is I'll remove this unknown, unwanted code. Okay, so December, some data I have given. Okay, so copy this. Okay, so now if you can see here, so I have created a object called data. Inside this there is a property called students, so which is of type array, and I am creating one more object called student. Inside this student object I have, so these many properties. If you go to this XML over here, how many values I want? I want first name, gender, date of birth, father's name, and contact number. So that is the reason I have created these many uh, properties in here. Okay, so let's take, yes, so that is enough, and then go back here to this view. Let's see whether we are maintaining the same values. So it's a first name, yes, gender, date of birth, so now what we did was, we created an object, so which is having a property of students array, and then we have created one more object, and we are pushing all the student object, students, to this students array, and then finally we are passing it to the model, and then we need to set this model to the view. In case if you want to set the model to the view, there is something called as this dot get view of, and then set model. Okay, so that means we are getting this particular view object and we are setting this particular model to the view. Okay, so now save this and go back to the browser and then refresh it. You can see first name, right? You can see here whichever the data we appended over here, so that got rendered. So in case if you want to um, add one more student, so what you can do is copy this, okay, and paste it here and give a different name and father's name 1, and save this and go back to this line, copy this, and again push the newly created object, save this. Now if you can see here, this is a different name, right? So now go back to the browser, okay, and refresh it here, so you can get one more record. So creating the objects like this is not a right way. So what we can do is, we can put in a for loop. Okay, what I will do is, I will just remove this, and then instead of this I will use for loop, okay, to create objects. Okay, so here for loop, I'm just using the for loop, so which iterates for 10 times, and then student object I'm creating, so in case for each and every time, so it will append 1, and then if it is, I'm randomly keeping male and female as a gender here. Okay, so then remove these two lines, okay, and then save this and go back to the browser and then refresh it here. So as of, yes, you can see here there are 10 rows got created, right? So if you see here single select master, so if you use this mode called single select master, then you can select only one row at a time. Okay, so now whenever you click on this row, we have configured something called as where is this? Let me go to the view, and in here, so whenever you select any row, so this particular method will get executed. So create this method and go to this uh, controller and create this method function. Okay, and then give separated by comma, and the default parameter is o event. Okay, save this, and now in here what do we need to do is, so every time when the user clicks on this row, so every time when the user clicks in this row, we need to get the data behind this row. So how can we get that? So first of all, what we need to do is let's go here. So first get the object. How do we need to get the object? So there is something called as, so o event dot o source dot get selected item. So o event dot o source. So first use this. Okay, o event dot o source. This is the event. So what is the source for this event? Table, right? So that means we are getting the table object in here dot. Okay, so if you want to get the selected item, so there is something called as selected item, get selected item. Okay, so then, so if you want to get the object behind this, there is something called as get binding context dot get object. So that means for each and every binded value, okay, if you have a look at this, all these values are binded to this particular table. That means for each and every binded row there is a context of that. So behind this context there will be object of this particular row. Okay, so let's go here and then save this one into a variable called, okay, save this one into a variable called some o current student. Okay, so now what we are doing all these things in here is, so we are going to see, soon after user clicks on this, we are going to display the data behind this, right? So as we discussed in the beginning of the tutorial, saying that, so we are going to discuss the fragments inside in this tutorial. So what is a fragments? A fragments are the reusable components inside SAP UI5 application. Okay, so let's, in case if you want to create a fragment, so then the syntax is, okay, so here create a file. Okay, create a file. So let's say the name of the file is show student, okay, dot fragment dot xml. Okay, so this is how we are going to create. So this is the name of the fragment, show student, and then the fragment should be end with dot fragment dot xml. Okay, okay, click on finish, and now we are going to implement this fragment. So how can we implement this fragment? Okay, in case if you want to mention it as a fragment, if you go to the view, if you can see here, this is a view, core dot view. So in the same way, in case if you want to create a fragment, there is something called as core dot fragment definition. Okay, so use this particular tag. Okay, use this particular tag to create a fragment. So in this fragment, we are going to show the total details of that particular row selected. So for that, so since we are going to display as a dialog box, so there is something called as dialog by dialog. Okay, if you go to this documentation, okay, if you go to the documentation, here you can see the dialog. Okay, so dialog is a control again. Okay, we are going to use this particular control inside our application. Okay, so let's use this particular dialog. Okay, so dialog has something called as content. It's an aggregation of the dialog. Okay, so let's create the dialog by dialog, and inside this content, so we are going to show all the details of the students at this particular point of time when the user clicks, right? So the user, the user has, okay, the user has these many property, the student has these many properties. So how many? So what are these? First name, last name, date of birth and all, right? So now we need to implement the dialog. So here to implement the dialog, anyways we are using this dialog box, and then inside the content, what I will do is I'll just create one uh, close button. Okay, so justify content header and then this one. So once the user clicks on this one, so what I need to, so okay, fine. So this is how we are going to create the fragments. In case if you want to read this fragment, when the user clicks on the what is this, the row. So then obviously there is something called as, when the user selects a row, then obviously we are executing this particular function. So go to this function, and in here, so read this fragment. So if you want to read the fragment, so then there is something called as okay, SAPUI.fragment. So there is a method, so use that particular method. Okay, so this is how you can read that particular fragment. Okay, fragments dot this one, and then we are passing this particular view object. Okay, so here first let's check whether this fragment exists, whether this particular dialog box or the instance of the fragment exists or not. If this does not exist, then only read this particular fragments. If it already exists, then don't read it. Okay, so once you read it, so then we are going to, yes, once you read this, so what we can do is, let's open this one first. Dot open. So that means what? So we got the fragment instance. So inside this fragment we have the dialog box, right? So we are going to open this by this particular dialog box. In case if you want to open the dialog box, so then so this dot, so once you read this fragment, then this particular object dot open, which will open the dialog box. Let's save this and go back to the browser. Okay, and then refresh the browser. Okay, so now click on this. Yes, you can see, so we are reading that fragment, and then we are opening the dialog box. The fragment object contains a dialog box, and then we are using open method on top of that, which opens the dialog box. So whenever you click on this button, so we need to close this dialog box, right? So for that, if you see this XML, this is a close button inside a fragment. So let me go to the fragment, and you can check. Let me go to the fragment, and in here, so on press, so we have a icon. So once user presses this icon, then obviously we have something called as handle show student dialog box close. So this is the event. So to configure this event, again create this particular method inside our controller. Go to this controller and come here and create a function. Okay, function, and then inside this, so close this method. How to close? This is the dialog box instance. Okay, so this dot close. Okay, so then give a comma here. Okay, so now go back to the browser and refresh the browser, and now click on this and then click on this. See, so the dialog box is getting closed. So now what we need to do is, when the user clicks on this, we are opening the dialog box. So we need to implement the dialog box in such a way that it will show all the details in this particular row, right? So for that, what all the details are here? So name, gender, and date of birth, and father's name and contact number. So we are going to display all these records, right? So let me go back to let me press F12 in here and go to the sources, and you can see all the sources over here. So in here, so put a debug point here. Okay, so when the user presses the row, this particular method will get executed, and we are keeping a breakpoint in here. Okay, so now go back to the browser and click on any row. So now, so what you do is just press next, next, next. If you can see here, current student. So we got all these, we got the data behind that particular row. So now we need to render this one inside this particular dialog box. That means we need to design the dialog box, and then we need to bind this object to the dialog box. So let's go ahead with designing this particular dialog box. Okay, so to design this dialog box, so we have something called as fragment in here, and come to this fragment, and then let's implement this fragment. So first we need to show the first name, right? So here, see, I have created one H box, and inside this there is one more H box, and in here I have a label called first name, and this is I created all these H boxes just to align the content properly. Okay, so here first name, and then text, in there is something called as text control. The text control accepts a text. So for this I'm binding one property called first name, right? In the same way, okay, first let's save this file and go back to the browser, and then refresh the browser and then execute it. see first name, right? In the same way, try to create all three fields. I mean, all the fields, like there are 3 or 4, fields are there, right? So now what you do is, let's render the gender. Okay, go back to this, and then in here, not in this, in here. Okay, so what I'll do is, let me take this out. Okay, paste it here. It should come in the next line, right? Save this, and then see now, save the file and go back to the browser, and then refresh the browser, and you can see first name and gender. If you click on this, it will close, right? So like that you implement all the fields. Okay, so now go back to this Eclipse. Okay, and then so implement the date of birth field, as well as father's name. Okay, and also something called as contact number. Okay, so save this and go back to the browser again and refresh this and click on this. You can see all these fields. Now we need to bind the model to this particular dialog so that we can render the data behind this, right? So close this and go back to the Eclipse and go to the controller in here. So anyways, we got the data in here, right? In case if you want to bind this data to this particular dialog, obviously we need to set a model, right? So for that, let's create a model. Okay, so once you create the dialog box, come here and then create the model. Sorry. So and then to this model, give this particular current student. So that means each and every time this object will get changed, right? So now what we did was, we created a model with the data, and then we need to set the model. So in case if you want to set a model to this particular dialog, so then come here and this dialog dot set model. So give the model. Okay, save this and then open it. Okay, save this and go back to the browser, and then refresh this, and let's click on this. So you can see first name. So because I selected the first row, the first name is first name 1 male, and then all the records. Close this and try to click on the next one. So you can see it is still a first name. It is not changing the data, right? So what you can do is go back to the Eclipse again. So in here, so once the data got, once this, for the first time when you execute this particular application, this is undefined. So since it is not undefined, that means not false equals to true, it will come here and then it will set the data, and then from the next time onwards it won't come here, it will come directly to this particular place, and then it will open with the same data with the same model, right? So that means, so model can be set to a particular container at only once. So then, so once you set a model, then we are going to change the data in this particular model. If you want to change the data, so then obviously what can you do? So you can get the model first. Okay, once you get the model, so then try to set the data, right? So how to get the model? So this dot dialog box dot, okay, dot get the model, and then set data. Okay, set data. So you can use this particular data. Okay, now save this and go back to the browser. Okay, so refresh the browser and then try to click on the first name. Okay, so now it is a first name. Close this and go to the second name. So this is first name 2, right? This is third row. This is first name 3, and female, right? And go to fourth one. So this is first name 4, it's a male. You can see the data back in the background, right? So like this you can, so if you can see here, I am using only one file. Okay, this is only show student.fragment.xml, and with the help of only one file I am showing all the details of all the students, right? So that means I'm gonna reuse the same fragment for many times for each and every click in the each and every row. Okay, so this is how we are going to implement the fragments inside SAP Wi-Fi application. So let's say in case if you want to add one dialog box here, let's say there is, you are going to provide one button, and when the user clicks on this button, and if you want to provide one more dialog, so wherein the user can provide the details and click on save, then you're going to update this particular model. Okay, so yeah, maybe we are going to look into the same requirement in the next tutorial. Okay, but in this tutorial, so just try to understand what is a fragment and what is, how these fragments will be reused. Okay, so as we implemented, so I'm just clicking on the first row, I'm getting the details of the first row and displaying in the fragment, right? I'm using the same fragment when I click on the second row. So like this, so whichever the row you click, so we are getting the same fragment object, and then we are displaying this one. So that means we are binding the data to the fragment with the help of a model. Okay, so where from we are getting the data? So we are getting the data from the row which the user clicked. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. So let's meet in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.